Chapter 924. I thought my lord was fooling around. I didn't expect it to be so effective. Wan Xian sighed. He thought that the implementation of new rhymes of Chinese would cause a lot of controversy. However, the students from the Golden Scale Academy went to challenge the Golden Scale Pavilion and used the practical effect to suppress the arrogant students. After the actual implementation, the effect was much better than expected. If new rhymes of Chinese can be implemented, many people in the world will benefit from it. Cheng Cheng smiled and stroked his beard. He also heard about the performance of the students from the Golden Scale Academy. As a teacher, he was proud of himself. Yes, yes. Wan Xian laughed heartily and swept away the haze. He escaped from Zhongzhou to Dongqing with Xie Qian and settled down in Wanzhou. At first, he was at a loss. Now he found a new goal in life and lived a fulfilling life. Although he was middle-aged, his spirit was abnormally high and did not lose to young people. The two of them joked. Cheng Cheng noticed that Master Yuan Jing was silent and frowned as if he had encountered a problem. Master Yuan Jing, what's bothering you? Wan Xian asked with concern. Feng Run, who heard the noise, put down the book in his hand and looked up at Master Yuan Jing. Master Yuan Jing came back to his senses and forced a smile. I suddenly thought of something. Feng Ren asked, what is it? It was not a simple thing to make Master Yuan Jing look worried. Yuan Jing said, yesterday my student Tang Zuda came to ask me about something. Thinking about it, what he said made sense. New rhymes of Chinese uses rhyme marks to mark pronunciations. It is simple and easy to learn, but Zuda is worried about one thing. If all the people in the world learn simple rhyme marks and replace the existing characters with rhyme marks, I'm afraid that no one will be willing to learn Chinese. Tang Yao was not the only one who was confused about this. Many students from the Golden Scale Pavilion also questioned it. They had to admit that this question was very tricky. Everyone froze on the spot. They agreed with the rhyme marks in new rhymes of Chinese because these rhyme marks could help people read and recognize characters. But if the people were only willing to learn simple rhyme marks and gave up learning the more difficult Chinese characters, what should they do? Cheng Cheng and the others pondered for a while. Wan Xian seemed to have thought of something and his brows relaxed. I don't think it's possible. Wan Xian smiled and said, Chinese characters are broad and profound. It's a cultural treasure and an unparalleled wealth. There are many Chinese characters with the same sound, but different characters with different meanings. How can a few rhymes replace them perfectly? When Master Yuan Jing heard this, he was suddenly enlightened. He patted his forehead and laughed at himself. I'm old, and my brain is useless. Langya County and Ningning County had been cradles for the export of talents since ancient times. They were the places with the strongest literary atmosphere. Huangsong had many talents under his command. Almost everyone had friends in these two places. With this layer of connection, even if the celebrities didn't think highly of Huangsong, they could still meet him for the sake of his friend. As for whether or not Huangsong could move them, it would depend on his personal performance. After one round, Huangsong managed to get close to many good seedlings. Because Master Yuan Jing had gone to Wanzhou, Langya Academy seemed a little quiet. As Master Yuan Jing's first disciple, Cheng Jing finally returned to Langya County. Naturally, he had to visit his mistress. Master Yuan Jing's mistress shook her head at Cheng Jing. Your master is the same. He said he would be back in 3 to 5 months, but now he refuses to come back. If he wasn't old, I would suspect that he has been seduced by some stunning beauty. Recently, he hasn't even written home letters. Cheng Jing was secretly amused as he listened quietly. If it weren't for Wunyang and Qingyun's filial piety, I would have brought people to Wanzhou to see who has seduced your master and refuses to leave. When Cheng Jing heard the word Qingyun, he remembered that he was his junior sister's husband. Niesun's courtesy name was Chengyun. Cheng Jing knew very well what his master's taste was like. A son-in-law who could satisfy him must be a dragon among men. Cheng Jing pondered for a while and prepared to write a visiting card to meet this brother-in-law. In terms of appearance, Niesun was one of the few handsome men in the world, especially the cinnabar up between his eyebrows. It was bright red and dazzling, making his skin whiter than snow. He was even more beautiful than a married woman. He felt that Wu Yang would be under great pressure facing such a husband. It was fine that he was beautiful, but he was also talented and had a firm character. He could be considered a gentleman. Huang Song glanced at him and whispered to Cheng Jing in private. Yumo, do you think it's possible that this Nye Qingyun? Cheng Jing said, we can try. Chapter 925. When Master Yuan Jing received his wife's letter and learned that his son-in-law had been abducted by Huang Song, his heart skipped a beat. Tang Yao saw his teacher's expression and thought that something had happened in Langia. He asked with concern, but Master Yuan Jing waved his hand. Although he said that he was fine, he could not hide his worried expression. After another month, Wei Ci, who was far away in Shangjing, received the news that Nie Sun had returned to Huang Song's camp. At the same time, he received a private letter from his teacher, Master Yuan Jing. Wei Ci read the letter quickly and flipped it over. A person's birth date was written on the back. The birth date was Nie Sun's. He used the person's birth date to make a divination. Wei Ci made a copy of the divinatory signs and the contents of his divination and sent someone to deliver it to Yuan Jing. Master Yuan Jing received the secret letter and quickly opened it. After a while, he could only sigh. What a sin! Everyone knew that Nie Sun left Zhong Zhao's Nie family to study in Langia to find his roots. Nie Sun had been abducted and sold when he was a baby. After passing through the hands of several human traffickers, he ended up in Zhong Zhao. He did not know where he came from or who his birth parents were. He also did not know if he was abandoned or if he was forced to separate from his birth parents. Nie Sun followed the clues of the human traffickers who had abducted him and traveled all the way, but the clues ended at the border of Dongqing. He heard that Master Yuan Jing's divination was very accurate, so he went to Langia County with the mentality of giving it a try. Master Yuan Jing did a divination for him, and it showed that Nie Sun would meet his blood relatives in a few years. It seemed like a good divination, but it was actually a bad one. The divination showed that Nie Sun and his family would be killed. Either Nie Sun would die, or his family would die in Nie Sun's hands. Master Yuan Jing asked Wei Ci to do a divination so that he could find out who Nie Sun's family member was. Wei Ci did the divination a few times, and the conclusion was the same. The divination showed Qian, which meant that the person who killed or was killed by Nie Sun would be Nie Sun's biological father. If Nie Sun had been a famous scholar, the possibility of him going against his biological father would be very low. He could even avoid the bad reputation of killing his own father. But now, he was instigated by Huang Song to become an official. He would inevitably follow Huang Song to war in the future. Who knew when he would kill his own father with his own hands? It was fine if this news was kept a secret for a lifetime, but if it was accidentally leaked, Nie Sun's reputation would be ruined. That was why Master Yuan Jing said that it was an ill-fated relationship. Cheng Zong's second year, June. Jiang Pengji was 19. Sister. Sis, wait for little brother. Lu Zhao rode on the maroon horse. He grabbed the reins in a panic and tried to catch up with Jiang Pengji. As it turned out, he really did not have the talent to ride a horse. Even after learning horsemanship for 2 years, he was still stuck at the level where he could only rely on the reins. Right at this moment, the maroon horse he was riding missed its footing and fell forward. Lu Zhao's heart was beating rapidly due to the sudden incident. He had no time to defend himself and could only close his eyes, hoping that he wouldn't fall and become a cripple. Yeah, the pain he expected didn't come. Instead, he felt his waist tighten and his falling motion came to an abrupt halt. He was forcefully carried onto the horse. Sister. Lu Zhao opened his eyes and sat diagonally on the horse's back, looking like he was still in a state of shock. Jiang Pengji's expression turned solemn. She flipped over and got off the horse. Lu Zhao, who had just escaped, also climbed off the horse's back shakily. This horse, it's probably crippled. The horse's hoof is completely broken. Jiang Pengji squatted down. The maroon horse's large, moist eyes were wide open. Its body was twitching because of the severe pain. Lu Zhao went forward to take a closer look and found that the front hoof of the maroon horse was indeed bent at a twisted angle. It was quickly bleeding and swollen. Who on earth dug such a hole here? Lu Zhao's heart ached so much that he wanted to cry. He had pestered Jiang Pingji for a long time to get this maroon horse. For this, he had even agreed to many unfair terms. He had to practice hard for more than 2 months before he could barely reach the standard of the other party. He had put in so much effort to get such a good horse, but it was crippled by the hole in the ground after only a few days of riding. Jiang Pengji's expression turned solemn. She asked the guards to send the maroon horse back to the stable to see if it could be treated. This is not a hole dug by someone. Lu Zhao's expression became even more dejected. If it was not man-made, then it was naturally formed. Was his horse unlucky enough to step on it and break its hoof? Have you heard of the saying that a cunning rabbit has 3 burrows? Jiang Pengji asked Lu Zhao. Sister, although I'm a little ignorant and incompetent, it's not to the extent that I don't even know that a cunning rabbit has 3 burrows. Lu Zhao swung the jade tassels hanging on his waist. Wait, sister, do you mean that this hole is not man-made? It was dug by a wild rabbit? It should be. Ask the people to stop racing horses nearby. Check how many rabbit burrows there are. Lu Zhao said, Today I want to have an all-rabbit feast. I want to eat all these beasts that dig holes randomly. His heart bled at the thought of his beloved horse. Jiang Pengji's lips curled into a slight smile. She said, Okay, I'll deduct Zixiao's salary and prepare an all-rabbit feast for you. Lu Zhao did not understand. What did wanting to have an all-rabbit feast have to do with deducting Wei Xi's salary? It was June now. The pasture was abundant. Wild rabbits were hopping around everywhere. After searching carefully, even Lu Zhao, who was a loser in archery, accidentally shot one. 200 guards went to catch them together. In less than an hour, they caught more than 50 wild rabbits. Lu Zhao muttered. He said, Even if I eat until my stomach explodes, I won't be able to finish so many. Jiang Pengji ordered the people to roast the wild rabbits. She and Lu Zhao kept 5 and distributed the rest. There's so many wild rabbits in the grasslands at the border of Chongzhou. There should be more in the northern borderline. Jiang Pengji chewed on a rabbit leg and looked in the direction of the northern borderline. She smiled and squinted her eyes. Of course, the rich pasture is all in the northern borderline. It's more attractive to these little brats. Lu Zhao was still dressed like a rich young master. Even when eating rabbit meat, he had to take out the exquisite silverware that he brought along with him. The plate he used was even made of transparent jade. Lucy had scolded him for being extravagant more than once. He was glad that he had a sister to protect him. His life was very comfortable. Is that so? Jiang Pengji smiled meaningfully. Lu Zhao shook his hands and used a knife to cut a few pieces of rabbit meat. He smeared seasoning on them evenly and skewered them to roast. The aroma filled the air. Sister, rabbit meat to show my respect to you. I didn't dote on you for nothing. After eating the roasted rabbit, Jiang Pengji and the others returned to the military camp. After 3 to 4 years of development, the northern borderline gradually recovered from the blow of the horse plague. The major horse farms also began to produce war horses. In less than 3 years, they would have the capital to command the Central Plains. Jiang Pengji wanted to take advantage of the golden opportunity before the northern borderline could catch its breath. She wanted to be the first to crush them on the grasslands. Dongqing was already divided. Each feudal lord had their own army. It was not that the northern borderline did not have the power to dominate the Central Plains. However, as long as Jiang Pengji was around, they could only dream. Chapter 926. Greetings, my lord. Feng Zhen and Qiguan Rang arrived one after the other and took their seats. No need for formalities. I called you here for one thing, Jiang Pengji said. Previously, I suggested preparing for the northern borderline. Now that we've rested enough, I'm preparing to make a move next spring. But I still need to hear your opinions on this matter. Both of them were stunned. They were not mentally prepared at all. Following a lord who could do whatever she wanted, they could enjoy a different kind of stimulation every moment. Qiguan Rang asked, What news did my lord receive? If there was no external stimulation, his lord wouldn't go crazy with people at every turn. Jiang Pengji frowned as she recounted the day's experience. They stationed troops in Shangyu County. Although it was at the border of the grasslands, there were already many traces of wild rabbits. One could imagine what the situation would be like in the northern borderline, where the grass was more plentiful. Her intuition told her that next year was the best time to make a move. If they fought quickly, they could turn around and join the warlords in the Central Plains after a short rest. Then, they could take advantage of the situation. If they missed this opportunity, it would be hard to say. However, fighting a war required accurate intelligence and credible plans. It could not rely on her intuition alone. Qiguan Rang and Feng Zhen looked at each other. They also knew about the rabbit and sheep strategy that Wei Ci had implemented in the past. Now, there were even traces of wild rabbits at the border. One could imagine that their strategy was effective. However, they still had to carefully consider whether it was suitable to start a war. Qiguan Rang stepped forward and bowed. He said, "My lord, in my opinion, it is better to be cautious. We can first send people to investigate the situation in the northern borderline. If the situation is suitable, then we can take stock of rations and troops. We can mobilize troops to guard the border of Chongzhou. We can strengthen the training of the troops and be ready for battle." There were many things to prepare for war. Not only did they have to understand the enemy's intelligence, but they also had to ensure their own supply lines. Fortunately, they had decided to station a large number of fields in Chongzhou and selected a few fields with strategic significance. When the autumn grain harvest came, it would be the third year of stationing fields in Chongzhou. The rations would be enough to support this large-scale war. The existence of the fields would not only reduce the loss of grain, but they could also provide support flexibly. They would not have to worry about the enemy interfering with the grain transportation route. Feng Zhen seconded the motion. Jiang Pengji said, "I know this too. I'm just informing you." Qiguan Rang and the other two secretly heaved a sigh of relief. As long as their lord did not go crazy and attack the north borderline tomorrow, everything would be fine. In the entire Chongzhou, no one was more familiar with the situation in the northern borderline than the Chui family. Jiang Pengji sent someone to invite Chui Yu, the head of the Chui family. She spent so much effort to rope in the Chui family, not only to use the Chui family to contend against the other aristocratic families of Chongzhou, but also because of their connections. Ever since Gu Xin followed Jiang Pengji's instructions and used a bunch of glass products to swindle a sum of money from the north borderline, he withdrew his business from the north borderline. This also meant that Jiang Pengji had lost an informer targeting the north borderline. Fortunately, the appearance of the Chui clan made up for this regret. Ever since Chui Yu boarded Jiang Pengji's boat, the Chui family status in Chongzhou rose with the tide. In the past 2 years, the Chui family had not only made a lot of money by producing rice paper, but also won an unprecedented reputation and status. The whole clan wished they could worship Jiang Pengji as the god of wealth. In order to express his determination, Chui Yu even took the initiative to ask for a position that didn't involve any real power or suspicion. "Greetings, my lord." Chui Yu bowed, then nodded slightly to Qiguan Rang and Feng Zhen. He was only willing to take a seat after the proper etiquette. Jiang Pengji asked, "Zhonghuan, I didn't summon you for anything else. I have something to ask you." Chui Yu said respectfully, "My lord, please ask. I will tell you everything I know. Your Chui family has been managing the north borderline business. Have you noticed anything unusual in the past 6 months? If it were someone else, they would definitely not be able to stand the Chui family doing business in Chongzhou and earning money from the north borderline. They were like grass on the wall." Chui Yu initially wanted to give up the business in the north borderline. Compared to the rice paper business and the secret recipe for making rice paper that Jiang Pengji had given him, the profits from the north borderline business were more like chicken ribs. Rather than keep it and arouse Jiang Pengji's suspicions, it was better to give it up. Jiang Pengji stepped in to stop it and even secretly supported the Chui family to develop the business in the north borderline. Chui was a smart man. He immediately came to his senses and put more effort into managing the business in the north borderline in the past 2 years. "Something unusual?" Chui thought for a moment and said in shame, "What are you referring to?" "The war horses produced by the Northern Kingdom's horse farm, the living conditions of ordinary herdsmen, the changes in the Northern Kingdom's court officials. That's about it. Jiang Pengji circled the area, so it was much easier for Cui Yu to answer. Because of the horse plague, there is not a single horse farm left in the north. However, production had been restored in the past 2 years. It was said that the largest farm had more than 700 new foals this year. The bloodline of the breed can't compare to those bred before, but it's still a rare breed. Cui Yu continued, the ordinary herdsmen are still the same. Their previous losses were too heavy, and they haven't recovered yet. As for the changes in the northern borderline's court, perhaps because of his paranoia, the king of the northern borderline no longer trusts the wise Wu Li Ba. I heard that the king of the northern borderline's health is showing signs of decline. A few of the adult princes are already involved in political affairs, and there are faint signs of a fight for the throne. Many of the court officials have chosen to side with him, openly or secretly. Jiang Pengji knitted her brows tightly after she heard that. More than 700? So many? Jiang Pengji was shocked when she heard the number. It takes at least 3 years for a foal to reach adulthood. How long had it been since the horse plague in the northern borderline? The number of 700 was only the output of the largest farm. Including other farms of various sizes, the number of foals produced was at least 2,000. Where did they get so many mares that were the right age to give birth? Cui Yu's expression was slightly solemn. He lowered his voice and said, My lord, I'm afraid we have to ask the Mengs and Sangzhou about this. As soon as he finished speaking, Jiang Pengji raised her hand and smashed the table in front of her. Meng Zhan, that old bastard. One day, I'll dig up his ancestral grave. Isn't he afraid of going down in history? Almost all the horse farms in Dongqing were in Sangzhou. In other words, the Mengs controlled the life and death of the horse farms in Dongqing. Without the Mengs' permission, how could so many pregnant mares be sent to the northern borderline? Cui Yu secretly wiped his sweat and continued. The northern borderline paid 10 times the price to buy the horses from the Mengs. That's why animals that have forgotten their ancestors. Jiang Pengji sneered. The Mengs were the descendants of the war god of the previous dynasty, Meng Jing. The 3 tribes of the northern borderline were the descendants of the Qianwu tribe. Meng Jing had contributed a lot to the massacre of the Qianwu tribe. She really didn't know how the 2 forces could be so thick-skinned as to cooperate. Jiang Pengji was angry. The audience in the streaming room was also shocked by her sudden outburst. After 2 to 3 years of practice, she gradually changed the inherent impression of the streaming room in the eyes of the audience in the blue bullet screen. Now, the ratio of red to blue in the streaming room was no longer 19:1. It was infinitely close to 1:1. It may seem like a lot, but it is impossible for all of them to be deployed on the battlefield. She also needed to leave some people behind to protect the territory under her rule, in case someone took advantage of the situation to invade. In other words, only 70 to 80,000 soldiers could be sent to the battlefield. Don't you think it's too strenuous for 70 to 80,000 people to fight against the northern borderline? The northern borderline could even beat up the whole of Dongqing, let alone Jiang Pengji, who currently occupied less than 1/3 of Dongqing's territory. Zhaoran, our ancestor Sun Tzu's art of war, said it well. Victory is the most important thing in war, not the long duration. If the long duration lasts, the soldiers will be blunt. If the city is besieged, the soldiers will lose their strength. If they lose their strength, the goods will be exhausted. If the host is dragged into the mire of a tug-of-war by the northern borderline, her chances of further development will be very slim. Will the feudal vassals around her turn a blind eye? At that time, not only would she have to face the suppression of the northern borderline's heavy troops, but she would also have to worry about the stirring feudal vassal forces behind her. The larger the war, the more important it was to end it as quickly as possible. With every day that passed, the risks they faced would increase. Even a big country could not withstand a prolonged tug-of-war, let alone a small vassal like Jiang Pengji. Fortunately, the northern borderline thought they were smart and made a stupid move. They greatly underestimated Jiang Pengji's strength and ambition. If it had been other feudal vassals, They might not have dared to take the initiative to stroke the tiger's whiskers in the northern frontier, much less 3 years. The northern borderline could take advantage of the gap of a few years to recover its vitality as soon as possible and recover the investment it had invested. After taking a breather, they could regain their arrogance. However, this was Jiang Pingji. She started plotting against the people of the northern borderline at the age of 12. Would she watch such a good opportunity slip away from her eyes? Now, it was time to consider pulling in the net. Jiang Pingji said with a serious expression, "This matter is very important. The secret must not be leaked, and the northern borderline will find out in advance." It was not that she did not trust the people present, but the ancient people's awareness of military secrets was too poor. In the history of the previous dynasty, how many coups had failed because of the leak of secrets? Returning to her own tent, Jiang Pengji wrote a secret letter and sent it to Shangjing at an urgent speed. While waiting for Wei Si's news, she began to make preparations. Cui Yu followed Jiang Pengji's orders and increased the number of merchants heading to the northern borderline. In order to gain the trust of the northern borderline, Cui Yu smuggled rice paper at a high price with Jiang Pengji's tacit approval. Using this method, the Cui family's business reached out to the political class of the northern borderline. Although they did not obtain a huge secret, they gathered a lot of useful information. Wei Si received the secret letter and packed his luggage overnight, preparing to rush to Chongzhou. At the same time, the news from the Cui family's caravan lifted the spirits of Jiang Pengji and the rest. TSK. It seems that wild rabbits are quite powerful. Herdsmen reared rabbits privately. There would always be rabbits that escaped carelessly and turned from domestic rabbits to wild rabbits. They took root and bred. Many wild rabbits sneaked into the pasture of the horse farm and dug rabbit holes one after another. At first, it was nothing, but when there were more rabbit holes, it was inevitable that horses would step into them. The lucky ones were safe and sound, while the unlucky ones had their legs broken. If a good horse's leg was not carefully cared for, it would be difficult to recover to its pre-injury state. In other words, the horse would be crippled. Before that, there were rabbits on the grasslands, but due to the restrictions of natural enemies and human activities, their numbers were limited to a certain range. Now, herdsmen reared wild rabbits privately, causing the number of wild rabbits to increase dramatically. However, the natural food chain had a certain degree of self-regulation. The increase in the number of wild rabbits fed more wild wolves on the grasslands. The number of wild wolves on the grasslands increased, requiring more wild rabbits as food. For a time, both parties maintained a delicate balance. Wild wolves had always been a headache for the horse farms. They were fierce by nature and often moved in groups. Every time they appeared, they would cause many casualties and bring great damage to the horse farms. Not only the increase in the number of wild wolves, but from time to time, there would be news of the horse's legs being injured. Once or twice was not a big deal, but when the reports increased, it quickly attracted the attention of the upper management of the horse farms. They sent people to find the source of the horse's leg injury and soon found the answer: rabbit holes. Rabbit holes were not unfamiliar to the grassland herdsmen. These bastards, they gritted their teeth in anger and felt their hearts bleed. The horse farms organized people to catch rabbits, but they greatly underestimated the number of rabbits. They could not find a solution to the rabbit hole problem. These bastards must have taken the wrong medicine. Why are there so many of them? The owner of the horse farm was dumbfounded. He still did not realize the seriousness of the matter. Chapter 928. Wu Liba had a bad premonition. Were there so many rabbit holes in the pasture in previous years? Wu Liba summoned the owner of the stud farm and inquired about the situation. The horse farm owner shook his head. Although rabbit holes have appeared in the past, there weren't many of them, and they weren't as densely packed as they are now. The uneasiness in Wu Liba's heart intensified. Something was not right. Something must have gone wrong somewhere. Although he was a man born in the grasslands, he had lived a good life since he was a child. He rarely came into contact with a lower-class herdsman and didn't even have a deep understanding of the situation in the grasslands. This was because he was a wise man of the northern borderline's foreign tribes. He had learned the Han culture of the Central Plains and used the essence of Han culture to help the northern borderline prosper. All these years, in order to help the northern borderline recover from the horse plague, Wu Liba did not have the heart to focus on anything else. Moreover, the king of the northern borderline was getting older, and the princes under him were getting more and more mature. The fight for the throne was about to surface. With two hidden dangers added together, how could Wu Liba have the energy to care about the lives of the lowly herdsmen? If it wasn't for the fact that the number of rabbit holes had increased greatly, causing the horses in the farm to be crippled, he wouldn't have investigated to the end. When his subordinates placed the information they had found in front of him, Wu Liba was so angry that he slammed his palm on the table, his expression ferocious. Who allowed these fools to act smart and raise wild rabbits? Wu Liba was exasperated. The guard was startled, and then he lowered his head to conceal the rage that surged in his eyes. If the imperial court had not made a mistake in its policy and bought the Fergana horses from Shalon, causing the entire northern borderline to be infected with the horse plague, would the low-level herdsmen be so poor that they had no money to buy rice? If they didn't rear these rabbits, who knew how many families would be forced to sell themselves as slaves? However, the guard did not dare to say this. He had been by Wu Liba's side for a few years and knew his temperament very well. "Master, do you know how the herdsmen lived in the past few years?" The guard reminded him carefully. Wu Liba's expression froze. Of course he knew. He was even indirectly related to the current situation. In order to cultivate more war horses, the royal court of the northern borderline promised the herdsman families benefits by selling them foals. Then, the government would buy them back at a high price. Because of this policy, the northern borderline was able to develop in a short period of more than 10 years. It even threatened Dongxing so much that they dared not act presumptuously. This suggestion was made by Wu Liba. It was because of it that he managed to secure his position as the wise one and gain the king's trust. This was true for success and also true for failure. The herdsmen's families had invested all their resources in the war horses and had no other source of income. The northern border horse plague broke out, and the imperial dynasty wasn't willing to make up for their losses, causing many families to die. Even if Wu Liba did not care about the lives of the commoners at the bottom of society, he could predict the consequences. Wu Liba said angrily, "Even so, they shouldn't have done this." The guard had a strange expression. If the herdsmen did not rear rabbits in exchange for food, what else could they do? Could it be that he didn't want to eat food and instead lay on the ground to eat withered grass? Rabbits had a short birth cycle and were easy to raise. Ordinary herdsmen's families relied on them to survive the hungriest times. If the royal court of the northern borderline was willing to take pity on the herdsmen and compensate them for their losses, they would not have to rear rabbits. The herdsmen had lived on the grassland for generations, so they knew how annoying it was for rabbits to dig holes. However, for the sake of their family, they had to do so. The guard wisely chose to remain silent. Wu Liba said, "Continue investigating. I don't believe that the Central Plains is so lacking in rabbit meat and rabbit fur. This is clearly a conspiracy against our Beijiang, and we must capture the culprit." The guard obeyed the order and went to investigate. He would not have known if he did not investigate, but after investigating a little, Wu Liba watched with trepidation. Almost every month, there would be caravans from different places purchasing smoked rabbit meat and tanned rabbit skin from the Beijiang herdsmen. The amount each time was not large, but when added up, it was an astronomical figure. Apart from that, they also purchased wool and mutton. Compared to selling mutton, the herdsmen preferred to increase the size of their flocks and sell their wool. The herdsmen did some calculations. As long as the sheep were alive, they could continue to sell their wool, and the profits would flow steadily. If they slaughtered the sheep, it would be a one-off transaction, and it would not be worth it. Selling wool was more profitable than selling rabbits. Almost every family reared sheep of varying sizes, and the number of sheep increased exponentially. The Beijiang herdsmen also had the habit of rearing sheep, so Wu Liba was not sure if this was a conspiracy. After thinking about it, he brought a group of guards to visit the herdsmen's families in secret. "It seems there's nothing wrong. Wu Liba rode on his horse and looked into the distance. The herdsmen herded their sheep, and the blue sky and green grass made everything seem so harmonious and serene. Old man, it must be tiring to watch over so many sheep. Chapter 9:29. The northern borderline imitated the Central Plains in many ways. Not only did they copy the harem system, but they also copied the rules of the imperial court. Court meetings were divided into large and small ones. The small ones dealt with small matters, while the big ones discussed important matters. In the big court meeting, the minister once again proposed the appointment of a crown prince. The king's expression was very ugly. His sons were in their prime, but he was beginning to slip from his peak like the sun setting in the west. This feeling of powerlessness was unbearable for the ambitious him. At this moment, he finally understood the Dongqing emperor's state of mind. He was also beginning to worry about personal gains and losses. He was afraid that his sons would take away his power and life when he was unguarded. As usual, he rejected the appointment of a crown prince. The king even reprimanded the minister and his sons who supported him. After an hour, he was starting to feel a little exhausted. Rubbing his forehead tiredly, the king said, "My dear ministers, do you have anything else to report? If there is nothing else, please leave." Before he could finish, Wu Liba interrupted the king. "Your Majesty, I have something to report." In recent years, Wu Liba was less and less trusted by the king. Because of the horse plague, he was almost convicted. After hiding his strength and biding his time for a few years, Wu Liba's presence in the imperial court gradually diminished. Thinking about it carefully, this was the first time he had made a report at the big court meeting this year. Seeing that the person who stepped out was Wu Liba, the king of the northern borderline had no choice but to endure his fatigue and continue listening. "What is it?" Wu Liba handed over the bamboo scroll that he had written. "Your Majesty, I've been visiting for a few days and found that the herdsmen are raising a large number of rabbits and sheep. If this goes on, these animals will definitely occupy the pasture, causing the war horses to have no grass to eat. Now is a critical time for us to recover our vitality. We must not let our guard down. The major horse farms have reported that more and more war horses have broken their legs because of the rabbit holes. This means..." The king of the northern borderline glanced at it and frowned. He suppressed the rising anger in his heart and interrupted Wu Liba. "Wu Liba, this is the court meeting, not your home. How dare you bring such a trivial matter to the court meeting?" Wu Liba was shocked. He hurriedly half-knelt on the ground and made a gesture of allegiance. He said, "Your Majesty, I'm definitely not trying to scare you. Now, all the signs show that the caravan's large-scale purchase of sheepskin rabbit meat is clearly a conspiracy against the pasture." Wu Liba's political enemy stepped forward and asked sharply, "Your Excellency Wu Liba does not know the sufferings of the human world. Do you really think that love is enough? You have captured the merchant caravan. Who are you going to sell the accumulated goods to? Sell them to you? The herdsmen rely on their meager income to feed their families. Your Excellency Wu Liba, on the other hand, wants to cut off their livelihood with just a few words." Wu Liba gritted his teeth and said, "The mutton and rabbit meat in the hands of the herdsmen can be bought at a low price as military rations." His political enemy snorted coldly and said, "Buy at a low price? What price is considered a low price? Go and ask the herdsmen if they are willing to sell. Even if they are willing to sell, do you know how much it will cost to buy them? Don't tell me you have your wife empty out her family to buy them for you." Everyone knew that Wu Liba's wife's family was the richest merchant in the northern borderline. In the past, when Wu Liba fought wars, many of the military supplies were added by this wife's family. Back then, Gu Xion's colored glass of the Heavenly Palace had cheated the noble women and merchants of the northern borderline, swindling over 20 million strings of coins from them. Wu Liba's wife's family was devastated by this setback. Now, not to mention funding Wu Liba, it would be good enough if they did not occasionally come to Wu Liba to ask for favors. This political enemy had purposely brought up this matter to humiliate Wu Liba. Wu Liba was choked by the other party's words and almost couldn't breathe. If this was any other time, of course, he could think of a countermeasure. Now that he had suffered consecutive blows, he could not calm down at all. The political enemy sneered and bent down to whisper in Wu Liba's ear, "Even if the king does as you wish, I'm afraid he will not be able to." Wu Liba suddenly turned around and glared at him fiercely. The political enemy smiled brightly, but his words were filled with thorns. "Sir, have you forgotten that it was you who suggested that the king purchase Mares from the Zhangzhou horse farm at a high price to fill up the farm so that it can recover quickly? The imperial court's finances are already stretched thin, yet you still bring up such a suggestion to the king at this time." The northern borderline imperial court was already so poor that they did not even have much food reserves. If they captured the merchant caravans and cut off the livelihood of the citizens, then they would incur the wrath of the masses. Wu Liba was usually quite smart. Why was he so muddle-headed when faced with such a matter? Or could it be that this person was used to being arrogant and thought that the northern borderline's prosperity was due to him alone? There was a saying in the Central Plains that went, "Water can carry a boat, but it can also capsize it." Chapter 9:30. Wu Liba was exasperated. He said angrily, "Are we just going to ignore this and allow the mastermind to succeed? If the king's hegemony stops here, you will be sinners for all eternity. Who can bear the responsibility? Since you are loyal to the king, shouldn't you think for him?" As he spoke, his heart trembled. He was so angry that his entire face was green. How can the king fulfill his grand ambition of ruling the Central Plains if we allow these treacherous officials to drag us down? The political enemy's expression turned serious. His eyes were cold. He laughed ferociously and said loudly, "Fine, fine, fine. In the entire court, only you are loyal to the king. We are all treacherous officials. But, in my opinion, you are also a treacherous official with evil intentions. Wu Liba, you ignore the current situation and force the king to do as you wish. Do you have a final say in the northern borderline or the king? So what if you were a wise man? Does the king not have the ability to judge for himself?" If Wu Liba had not suggested working with the Zhangzhou family to buy Mares at a high price, the imperial court's finances would not be so tight. But now, the northern borderline imperial court was already stretched thin and could not afford to do anything else. In other words, the northern borderline was already tied up by the high price of horses. It would take at least a year or two to see any profits. The older Wu Liba got, the less sensible he became. Could he not see the northern borderline imperial court's current predicament? Don't try to sow discord. I, Wu Liba, am loyal to the king. I have never been disloyal, Wu Liba said. But can't you see the danger of the herdsmen raising large numbers of rabbits and sheep? If you can see it and still remain silent, then tell me, who is the disloyal one? The political enemy wanted to say something, but the northern borderline king roared and stopped the two from arguing. "All of you shut up. Court dismissed." The northern borderline king glared at Wu Liba. He used to like this wise man as much as he hated him now. In order to stabilize his power, the northern borderline king suppressed his adult sons. He deliberately ignored Wu Liba and tried to marginalize him. Why? Who asked the herdsmen to deify the wise man and think that whoever Wu Liba stood on was the real king of the grasslands? If it had been his younger self, he would not have cared about these rumors because he had the confidence to make Wu Liba work for him. Now that he was getting older, his health was not as good as before, but his children were still in the prime of their lives. Hearing similar rumors again, the king of the northern borderline only felt that it was ear-piercing. Even though he was slowly weakening Wu Liba, his sons were still rushing to curry favor with him. Which leader could endure this? He could not understand. Harun Shah was secretly pleased. It felt good to keep others in suspense. No wonder Wu Liba, that sour Confucian, liked to put on an act. Yes, pretend not to know. Harun Shah continued to act under the king's urging gaze. He said, "Your Majesty, how can you treat rabbits and wild rabbits the same? Rabbits are lazy and stupid. Their meat is too fat and their fur is not bright. Wild rabbits are alert and intelligent. They run on the grasslands all year round to avoid enemies. Their meat is tender and chewy. The price of the latter is naturally higher than the former. In the past, those merchants could get away with it, but not this year. Your Majesty will send someone to hint to the merchants to increase the price of wild rabbits. This way, the herdsmen will spontaneously catch wild rabbits. The herdsmen will earn a lot, and Your Majesty will not have to waste extra manpower to get rid of the wild rabbits on the grasslands. The king's eyes lit up. He had not thought of this idea. Is this feasible? Harun Shah said, Of course it is feasible. Your Majesty will not have to pay to get rid of the extra wild rabbits, and the herdsmen will be grateful to you. The king was overjoyed. This is a wonderful plan. Harun Shah could not help but smile. He said a few humble words. You don't have to be so humble. The king sighed. He raised his hand and patted the other's shoulder. He said, Compared to Wu Li Ba, who always causes trouble for me, you are the one who is truly loyal. Not only did you offer elixirs, but you also gave me advice. Harun Shah said, This is what your subjects should do. The king of the northern borderline felt waves of fatigue. He asked the female slave to bring his medicine. After a while, the king of the northern borderline felt refreshed. His face was rosy and his eyes were bright. As expected of the secret recipe of the Xia imperial court, it is good stuff for the emperor to enjoy. It is indeed effective. He allowed a long sigh. His expression was dreamy. Because of his old age, his body was not as good as before. He could not even satisfy the women in his backyard. To a proud man of the northern borderline, this was an unbearable humiliation. Fortunately, Harun Shah was loyal and gave him the elixir recipe that only the emperor had the right to use. Every time he took it, he felt refreshed and full of vitality. He was even more energetic when it came to sex. It was said that long-term use could also prolong one's life. Chapter 9:31. Harun Shah and Wu Li Ba had been at each other's throats for many years and had always been at a disadvantage. Now that he had the help of an advisor, he was like a tiger that had grown wings. There were signs that he would replace Wu Li Ba as the wise one. Speaking of advisors, Harun Shah's lips curled into a smug smile. He hated scholars, but he also knew that if the North borderline wanted to be strong and prosperous, the brains of those scholars were indispensable. Coincidentally, among the slaves he bought, there was a scholar who came from a poor family. Moreover, he was a talented person with the ability to rule the world. Not only did Harun Shah free him from his slave status, he even put him in an important position and provided him with a luxurious life. There was a saying in the Central Plains that went like this: a scholar would die for his bosom friend. Harun Shah felt that the fact that he had saved his advisor's life was enough for him to sacrifice his life for him. Sure enough, that advisor also had the temperament of a Confucian scholar. He wholeheartedly wanted to repay Harun Shah for saving his life. Ever since he received the guidance of his advisor, Harun Shah quickly recruited his own group of forces in the imperial court. In order to consolidate his power, the advisor also offered an elixir formula, Hanshi powder. Hanshi powder was a miraculous medicine that was highly recommended by the aristocratic families of the Central Plains. Quite a number of scholars liked to consume it during gatherings to stimulate their own inspiration. After consuming it, one's mind would be clear, as if they were being assisted by God. Furthermore, it would have the miraculous effect of prolonging one's life and replenishing one's yang energy. Harun Shah had some doubts at first, but after careful investigation, he confirmed that his advisor was not lying. Hanshi powder was indeed a good thing. Only the rich and powerful aristocratic families had the right to consume it. Harun Shah ate the Amway. However, good things could not be enjoyed by himself. He first thought of the king of the northern borderline. By offering the prescription of the Hanshi powder, Harun Shah gained even more trust from the king of the northern borderline. Mister's foresight is truly divine. Your guess is indeed accurate. Harun Shah imitated the scholars of the Central Plains and bowed with cupped fists. Unfortunately, his movements were not standard and looked somewhat comical. The advisor said, "Congratulations, my lord. The bitterness has finally come to an end." Harun Shah laughed heartily, saying, "If not for Sir's help, how could Harun Shah be here today?" After bragging to each other, Harinsha rubbed his hands and asked his advisor, "Sir, what should we do next? That old man Wu Liba is not easy to deal with. I'm afraid he will make a comeback. A centipede dies, but does not fall down. No matter what, Wu Liba was a famous sage of the northern borderline." "My lord, don't panic." The advisor smiled coldly. "That Wu Liba won't be jumping around for long." Harinsha felt more at ease. The two of them plotted for a while more before Harinsha left the advisor's tent, satisfied. After Harinsha left, the well-dressed advisor's face turned cold as he stood in the tent, deep in thought. The advisor snorted. "Wei Zixiao, what are you up to?" At the same time, Wei Ci rushed to Chongzhou. He changed horses a few times before he reached Chongzhou. Feng Zhen snorted coldly and said, "Wei Zixiao, what do you have up your sleeve?" Wei Ci said, "Panacea." Feng Zhen choked. Qiguan Rang frowned. "Does Zixiao have other plans?" They plan to evacuate the merchants from the northern borderline and stop buying wool and rabbits, allowing the northern borderline to descend into chaos. If the herdsmen could not sell their rabbits and goats, it would inevitably lead to civil unrest. Even if it couldn't shake the northern border imperial court, it could cause the tribes in the northern border to be at odds. Unexpectedly, Wei Ci refused and wanted to continue buying. Of course, Wei Ci suddenly said something shocking. He said, "The king of the northern borderline will not live for long." Everyone in the tent widened their eyes in shock and looked at Wei Ci. "When did you get the information?" Wei Ci said, "There is no information." Feng Zhen pressed his throbbing brows and said impatiently, "Say everything at once. Don't say one sentence at a time." Wei Ci gave Feng Zhen a meaningful look, which made the other party feel baffled. "The king of the northern borderline is addicted to hanshi powder. He takes it without restraint. His body is strong on the outside, but weak on the inside. He won't live for long." Hanshi powder? Hearing these three words, Feng Zhen shuddered subconsciously. He had no choice. The experience of being forced to quit by Jiangpingji was too deep. Occasionally, he would dream about it in the middle of the night and be scared awake. "Are you sure?" Wei Ci said, "Absolutely sure." Feng Zhen's heart skipped a beat. "Wait, could it be you are plotting something again?" Wei Ci said, "It's nothing." After saying that, he refused to continue, making Feng Zhen and Qiguan Rang so angry that they wanted to hit him. Jiang Pengji, who was sitting at the head of the table, laughed and said, "Zixiao, don't tease him in case he quits." Wei Ci nodded slightly and did not answer directly. Instead, he mentioned another matter. "I'm supervising the construction of the provincial government in Shangjing. Someone came to visit me at night. This person is a slave, an old escaped slave. He said to Ci that he wants to enter the Lord's tent and serve her." Feng Zhen said in surprise, "An old escaped slave? And he wants to recommend himself? Could it be that this person has some background?" "This person does indeed have a background. He is one of Zhongzhou. His name is Zaidao." Sun Zaidao. Most of the people had already closed their shops, but the bookstore on the street was still open. Where did Fusho go today? When Officer Liu came to the door with Iceman to propose marriage, he heard the woman sitting on the counter from afar and turned his head to ask the man inside. The man replied with a smile, "Isn't it to avoid you?" This person was actually over 50 years old, but from his appearance, he seemed to be less than 40 years old. "Why are you avoiding me?" The woman boldly propped up one leg and placed it on the counter, completely ignoring the gazes of the outside world. She said, "In the past, I was too busy to look at him, so he felt sad in private. Now that I've been watching him every day, he's hiding faster than a rabbit. Distance makes the heart grow fonder." The man smiled. "He doesn't like to practice martial arts. You beat him all day, how could he not hide?" The woman raised her eyebrows. "Fusho is already 18 years old. His arms can't even pull a stone bow. How shameful it is. His sister can beat him 10 times with one finger. Do you believe it? He actually dares to hide from me. How dare he? I should really throw him to his sister's place to train." The man said, "What's the difference? He just escaped from the tiger's den into the wolf's den. You're too lenient with him. If he doesn't listen, just beat him up. If one doesn't work, then beat him up again. There's nothing that can't be solved with a fist. The man said faintly, If you're willing to beat him up, why would you bother me here? Now you think I'm annoying? The woman quickly changed the topic, perfectly demonstrating what it means to say wind is rain. Ahem, Lanting, don't let people see you as a joke. What did you call me? Well, Pung Pung, don't make trouble. No, I want to make trouble. The man looked at Officer Liu as if he had seen his savior. Officer Liu straightened his chest and was about to walk into the bookstore when he saw the rude woman holding an abacus blocking his way. Can't you see that I'm dealing with family matters? The woman threw a look at him, her eyes brewing a frightening sharpness. Officer Liu was so scared that he took a step back. After a while, Officer Liu felt that something was wrong. He was here to propose marriage. He motioned for Iceman to come forward and state his purpose. In his opinion, this family of 3 was just an outsider with no local relatives. How could they fight against a local snake like him? Iceman chuckled and stated his purpose. The expressions of the old couple changed. The man looked up at them and asked with a smile, Marry into our family? The woman said, Propose marriage? To whom? Officer Liu said, To your son, of course. The woman laughed and said, Look at your face. Even if you marry a fairy-like wife, your daughter won't be any better, right? Who gave you the courage to come to my son's house and propose marriage? Chapter 9:33. Jiang Pengji felt dizzy, like a rootless duckweed floating in a vast sea. Lu Shi's body was that of an ordinary person, after all. He would become weak when he was old, which was something Jiang Pengji could not resist. He could almost hear Jiang Yan's cries, as well as the shouts of the officials, whether sincere or not. Forget it. Jiang Pengji's consciousness was blurred. She felt endless regret and let the darkness engulf her consciousness. After some time, she felt a sense of crisis. She subconsciously jumped away from the attack. Her agility surprised her. Jiang Xiaojiu, your skills have regressed by more than a little. Who is it? Jiang Pengji heard a strange woman's laughing voice. It took her some effort to stabilize her body. It was so dazzling, the light around her was unusually bright. Jiang Pengji, who was used to the dark, was particularly uncomfortable. She even shed physiological tears. Who are you? Jiang Pengji blurted out. She subconsciously used her interstellar mother tongue that she had not used for many years. The woman was surprised and said sarcastically, Tisk, TSK. You were only injured once. How could you forget your old boss? Old boss. Jiang Xiaojiu? The two unfamiliar, yet familiar words were put together. It was like 2 pairs of hands combined into one, unlocking the dust-laden memories of many years. She took a long time to adapt to the surrounding light. She was shocked to find that she was in the medical center of the federal military. She looked at her arm. She was also wearing the blue and white hospital gown of the medical center. What happened? She blinked her eyes quickly. She could not react until a person appeared in front of her. When she saw the person's face, Jiang Pengji subconsciously straightened her back and gave a federal military salute. Greetings, Chief. The other party stood in front of her, squinting slightly as he looked at her face carefully with a scrutinizing gaze. There's no problem with your spiritual fluctuation, the person said slowly. Otherwise, based on your performance just now, I would have suspected that your body was maliciously taken over. You've been in a coma for 3 months, but you're still alive. If you don't wake up soon, I'm afraid the 7th Corps will be sent in. The human alliance was not harmonious. There were political struggles between the various corps. Jiang Pengji was under her. If she did not wake up, who knew if an outsider would be sent to take over the 7th Corps? By then, even if Jiang Pengji had a chance to wake up, she might not. Because there were far more people who didn't want her to wake up than there were people who wanted her to wake up. Receiving the news that Jiang Pengji was seriously injured and in a coma, the woman had no choice but to interrupt her vacation and take over the 7th Corps. Thank you for your hard work, old chief. Jiang Pengji pressed her aching forehead with one hand. The memories in her mind made her unable to distinguish reality from a dream. That life was 30 to 40 years long, and it was already comparable to the previous years. After so many years, Jiang Pengji could only dig out her shallow memories and recognize that the woman in front of her was her old boss. As for more, she still needed time to dig deeper into her memories. Not at all, not at all. Cancel your sick leave as soon as possible and come back to take charge. The woman crossed her arms and leaned against the bed. She narrowed her eyes and said, "You should be more careful these days. The federal marshal election is approaching, and there are many people looking for trouble with you." Marshal election? Jiang Pengji was stunned. Was there such a thing? Wait, there really was such a thing. The old general in front of him had retired from the 7th Division and was originally going to enter the parliament to find a job, but who knew that the old general had contracted a genetic disease and would not live for long. For the sake of the political stability of the human alliance, the marshal election had to be held at the last minute. The old general was also on the list. As her successor, Jiang Pengji naturally belonged to her faction. Because Jiang Pengji was still in her prime and held military power, she had a lot of weight in the marshal election for the woman in front of her. As long as the marshal election was not settled, the battle surging in the dark would not come to an end. After sorting out the relevant memories, Jiang Pengji said, "Don't worry, old chief. I will recover as soon as possible and take up my post again." Her attitude was too obedient, which made the woman suspicious. Jiang Pengji had always been a thorn in the side. Back then, the woman had to bear the pressure and strongly recommend Jiang Pengji to push her to the position of the 7th Division. Even so, Jiang Pengji did not restrain herself. She was also indifferent to the old chief. What was wrong with her today? It's good that you know. The woman shook her head and her tone softened. Since you are awake, the pressure we face is less. There's no rush to return to your post. First, train your skills so that you don't know how you die if you're assassinated. Jiang Pengji felt that her skills had improved, but in the eyes of others, she had regressed by 70 to 80%. With such weak skills, it would not be surprising if she was assassinated on street. The old chief helped Jiang Pengji stabilize the 7th Division and bought time for her to adapt to the changes. When Jiang Pengji completely recovered to her peak state, more than a month had passed. When she was discharged from the hospital and returned to the division, she had only been away for half a year. For interstellar humans with long lifespans, half a year was no different from more than 10 days. However, Jiang Pengji's change shocked all the officers of the 7th Division. Had they ever seen a chief who quietly checked documents? In the past, they could not find anyone to sign. It depended on their mood whether they signed or not. Had they ever seen a chief who spoke calmly and without sarcasm? In the past, her subordinates would avoid her when they saw her. They were afraid that their guilty deeds would be exposed by the other party and become a topic of conversation. Had they ever seen a chief who was gentle, tolerant, and dignified? In the past, when her subordinates saw her, it was like a mouse seeing a cat. What had happened to cause such a drastic change in their chief? Is it possible that he is in love? This speculation spread like wildfire and even reached Jiang Pengji's ears. Jiang Pengji smiled. Although the news is not true, it is not groundless. The selection for the marshal was in full swing. The situation within the Federation became more and more serious. Jiang Pengji was so busy that she did not have time to think. She was like a spinning top. When the curtains fell on the election, more than half a year had passed. The Federation's military forces were purged. Fortunately, his old boss had successfully passed through all the obstacles. Otherwise, based on the old chief's voice in the election, the new marshal would not spare the officers under the old chief's faction after taking office. These days, it is like a dream. Jiang Pengji blinked and looked at the old chief in the marshal's uniform. She sighed tiredly. The old boss laughed and said, "Aren't you dreaming?" Jiang Pengji was stunned. The old chief said, "You know why your immediate superior handed the 7th Division to you. It was for retirement. How could she participate in the selection for the marshal? This dream is full of flaws. I did not expect you to be willing to stay for so long." Jiang Pengji looked into his eyes, and her lazy expression became dull and insipid. "Then what is this?" The old chief laughed. This is probably your subconscious hope before you die. You hope that everything will be perfect. What about me? I'm dead, but you still have a chance, but this is a gamble. If you win, you could be perfect. If you lose, you will have nothing. What gamble? A comeback is equivalent to giving you a chance to be resurrected. However, your memory will be sealed. Everything will return to the starting point. He chose the most arrogant one. King Wen of Zhou met Liu Shang, and Liu Shang helped King Wu of Zhou to wage war against the Zhou dynasty. In my humble opinion, Liu Zhongqing lacks nothing but Sun Zidao. Who was Liu Zhongqing? Liu Shi. On the surface, it seemed that Liu Shi was only compared to King Wen of Zhou. If Liu Shi was King Wen of Zhou, then who is King Wu of Zhou and who is LV Shang? Wei Xi's thoughts turned, and he turned his head to look at the person who came, only to see a gray-haired old man dressed in tattered linen walking out from the dark shadows. Then do you know where Sun Zidao is? Far away on the horizon, yet close at hand. I am Sun Zidao. Sun Wenwen wasn't someone who liked to be modest. Although he was at the bottom now, he believed that he would rise again one day. This was how Wei Ci first met Sun Wen. Sun Wen had successfully attracted Wei Ci's attention, but it wasn't enough. He needed more bargaining chips to gain Wei Ci's favor. As long as Wei Ci valued him and introduced him to Liu Shi, Sun Wen believed that he had the ability to gain Liu Shi's appreciation. Sun Wen felt that he didn't have much to live for in this life, but his grandson was still young. If he didn't secure a future for his grandson, how could he meet his wife, only son, and daughter-in-law in the afterlife? Therefore, he could only succeed this time. Failure was not allowed. He was very lucky to have met Wei Ci. Even if Sun Wen didn't scheme, as long as Wei Ci knew his name, he would still introduce him to Liu Shi. Sun Wen offered his loyalty and entered the northern borderline as a slave to help Jiang Pengji complete her great undertaking. As for Sun Wen's grandson, Wei Ci sent him to Wanzhou to look after him and made him a transfer student to the Golden Scale Academy. Not only was he a hostage, but he also made a promise to Sun Wen. Wei Ci also promised Sun Wen that if Sun Wen unfortunately died in the northern borderline, he would adopt Sun Wen's grandson and take care of him as his own son. Without any worries, Sun Wen entered the northern borderline as a slave. In a few short months, he became the trusted advisor of the northern borderline's important minister, Herunsha. Everyone in the tent listened to Wei Ci's narration and sighed. They also admired Sun Wen a little more. He was indeed a talent. At the same time, they were even more afraid of Wei Ci. He had quietly placed such a terrifying spy in the northern borderline. It wasn't that Herunsha was stupid. It was clearly that the level of the spy that Wei Ci threw was too high. As for Hanshi powder, Feng Zhen glanced at Wei Ci. What was Hanshi powder? He had a deep understanding of it. Killing someone was just a matter of nodding one's head to the ground. Wei Ci actually used Hanshi powder to trick people. It was really well done. Zixiao usually looks like a decent person, but I didn't expect him to be a passionate person. Feng Zhen raised a wine cup on the table. If it's feasible, we can secretly support the weakest prince of the northern borderline so that they can fight evenly. The more evenly matched they were, the longer the civil strife in the northern borderline would last, and the more benefits they would get. On the contrary, if a certain prince was too powerful and crushed the other princes, stabilizing the momentum of the northern borderline, then it would not be easy for them to take advantage of the chaos in the northern borderline. Therefore, Qiguan Rang had the evil intention of scheming against the north borderline again. Is this feasible? Jiang Pengji frowned. Qiguan Rang said, whether it's feasible or not depends on whether Sun Zidao is as capable as Liu Shang. Jiang Pengji glanced at Qiguan Rang with a smile. He held the fan handle in his hand, the fan slightly pressed against his knees, and his eyes were downcast. Lia's hoodie. Guess the conversation between our streamer and little Rang Rang through their eyes? Fukuda Joe, the host said, I know you're jealous. Zuandai, little Rang Rang said, Humph, I'm angry. I'm going to ignore you. Yongye Tian-chun, Simi-I said, didn't we agree to cook this little frog? Why has the Lord fallen in love with someone else? Bo Xiaoyan, Feng Tian Tian said, "It's supposed to be a two-person show, but I've become the fourth person." The audience in the streaming room expressed that the drama queen's performance was more exciting than the streamers. Of course, it was fortunate that there were many people in the streaming room. Apart from the drama queen, there were also big shots from different industries. Jun Shuang, "I feel sorry for the northern borderline for a second. According to the streamer's rhythm, it's only a matter of time before the northern borderline is conquered. Guikai Guo Fengxiu. Isn't that so? Sunwen sounds pretty awesome. Have you guys realized that anyone who's been stamped by Simi is not simple? If Sunwen really has Lu Shang's ability, the northern borderline is destined to be torn apart. Moreover, the northern borderline is still a tribal nation. There is no concept of a big family among them. They're used to fighting for themselves. If even the northern borderline's royal court, which connects the forces, is destroyed, wouldn't they be scattered like sand? Qiguan Rang is even more ruthless. He wants the northern borderline to die of internal strife. Bai Hedawang, if I say that this situation reminds me of the 8 Princes Rebellion and the 5 Barbarians Wanhua, will you guys scold me? Lao Sijilianmeng. In addition to these schemes, the streamer is also ruthless in farming and training her troops. She is completely aiming at the northern borderline. In ancient times, 3 months of training was already considered elite. How long did the streamer's troops train for? 3 to 5 years, right? She still uses modern advanced training methods. Wei Zixiao, oh Wei Zixiao. You must remember your promise. Only then can you live up to this old man's plan. Sun Wen's entry into the industry was a little awkward. If it had been earlier, he and his lord would have been able to nurture a friendship in times of adversity. If it was a little later, it would be the icing on the cake. Even if he couldn't make it to the top, Sun Wen didn't have much ambition. All he wanted was a place to stay. It just had to be at this time of year. The lord was preparing for battle in the north borderline. Although the chances of winning the former were quite high, it wasn't 100%. What if he lost? His grandson was still in Wanzhou. Sun Wen couldn't afford to gamble. Therefore, he could only do his best and risk his life to help Jiang Pingji. The image of his grandson's young and adorable face appeared in Sun Wen's mind. His cold and hard heart softened a little, but soon became even harder and colder. Beijiang must die. While Sun Wen was stirring up trouble in the north borderline, Jiang Pengji and the others were eating melons in the military tent. She was not eating watermelon. She was roasting sweet potatoes and sweet potatoes. Where has Uncle Gu been doing business all these years? Jiang Pengji followed the instructions of the viewers in the streaming room and threw the sweet potatoes into the fire. At the same time, she turned her head to ask Gu Exin, whose face was full of vicissitudes. Gu Xin traveled north and south to do business. He often only replied to a letter once every 6 months. Jiang Pengji had no idea where he had gone. Gu Xin smiled and said, he went to Beiyuan, Xichang, and Shalan. The sweet potatoes were discovered at the border of Xichang, and the sweet potatoes were taken from Shalan. I asked the locals for advice and brought their seedlings all the way back with great difficulty. I just want you to have a taste. Wei Xi was silent and didn't speak. In his previous life, when the Jiang dynasty was established, the country was strong and prosperous. In order to please the emperor, the surrounding small countries always brought all kinds of things from their own countries. The officials of the Jiang dynasty didn't want to be outdone. The sweet potatoes and sweet potatoes were presented at that time. However, these two small things almost caused a bloody massacre. Sweet potatoes were grown at the border of Xichang. The locals chopped them up and fed them to pigs. No one had personally tasted them. In the eyes of the locals, they were not food for humans at all. They were only fit to be fed to livestock. In Shalan, sweet potatoes were also eaten by the poor. They were lowly food in the wild. Yet these two lowly foods were served to the emperor's table as dishes for a state banquet. After she ate a few mouthfuls with relish, someone actually stood up and pointed out the truth. To this day, Wei Ci could still remember the silence in the hall. Chapter 9:37. Aren't you going to eat? I think it's quite delicious and tastes good. For the people, food that can fill their stomachs is good food. The so-called lowly or elegant is something that only rich second generations who are born with wealth and do not know hunger or poverty pay attention to. Not only did Her Majesty's appetite increase, she ate 2 portions and asked the royal chef to prepare one for the crown princess, Jiangyan. Wei Ci remembered clearly that Her Majesty's body was getting weaker as she grew older. It was rare for her to have such a good appetite. The world is peaceful now, but I, Yen'er, cannot forget the sufferings my ancestors suffered in this chaotic world. I must always be grateful and put the people's livelihood in the first place. Only then will I not let down the blood and sacrifice of my ancestors. There is no distinction between high and low food. Are you saying that if I throw all the delicacies at the state banquet to the pigs in the pigsty, they are lowly food and not worthy of being eaten by all of you here? With just a few words, she not only smoothed out the malicious humiliation, but also showed her love for the people. At the same time, she handled it gently and avoided a bloody massacre. If she didn't say that, anyone who handled sweet potatoes and sweet potatoes, regardless of whether they were foreign ministers, servants, royal chefs, or officials of the dynasty, could easily be accused of a groundless crime and could not escape the death penalty. If the purge was carried out, at least 2,000 lives would be lost. The majesty of the emperor could not be challenged by anyone. Her Majesty chose to handle it gently and even generously accepted sweet potatoes and sweet potatoes. She ordered the royal chefs to use these 2 foods as ingredients to research various dishes. When they were accepted by the people, they were promoted to the whole country. Who could have imagined that these 2 things could be so prolific? Because of them, the Zhang dynasty did not have a large-scale food shortage. After being reborn and seeing these 2 little things again, Wei Ci's heart was filled with emotions. Before he could come back to his senses, he heard Gu Xian's words. However, they're not popular locally. People won't eat them unless they are extremely hungry. They are usually fed to domestic pigs. Jiang Pengji's expression did not change at all. She smiled and said, "They taste good. It's good that they are edible." Wei Ci's expression became gentler, and the smile on his lips became wider. Her Majesty was indeed the emperor. No matter when she was, her pure and innocent nature had never changed. Gu Xian smiled bitterly. Little Master is still so open-minded. This old servant hasn't finished speaking. Jiang Pengji was drooling over the taste of the roasted sweet potatoes that the audience was talking about. She asked, "Is there anything else you want to say?" This old servant naturally has a reason for bringing them back. If it wasn't for this old servant wouldn't have dared to send such unpresentable food to Little Master. Gu Xian's way of thinking was still very conservative. Humans shouldn't fight over food with animals. It would be shameful to say it out loud. "Uncle Gu, I'm listening," Gu Xian said carefully. "They have a high yield and are easy to grow. They are not afraid of drought, and people can eat them to fill their stomachs. They are suitable for farmers." However, this old servant carefully inquired about it. According to the old farmer, eating them together with a few kinds of food will counteract each other. In serious cases, it can even cause death, so it's better to be cautious. For example, persimmons, eggs, river crabs, and so on. If it's light, it can cause unbearable abdominal pain. If it's serious, it can cause the intestines to rot. Jiang Pengji said, "Uncle Gu is really meticulous. If it were me, I'm afraid I wouldn't have noticed it." Gu Xian smiled. Little boss is too humble. By the time they finished talking, the sweet potatoes and sweet potatoes were almost cooked. Jiang Pengji found a stick and prodded them out of the fire. Hot, hot, hot. Her fingertips were scalded, and she raised her hand to pinch her ear. Only then did she feel better. When she peeled off the scorched surface and revealed the golden and fragrant melon flesh, she salivated even faster. She divided the roasted sweet potatoes and sweet potatoes into several portions and sent someone to deliver them to Fengzhen and Qiguanrang. The remaining portion was divided among the 3 of them in the tent. "Uncle Gu, you're getting old. Why don't you settle down and stop personally running around for business?" Jiang Pengji sighed. Gu Xian traveled north and south for business. It wasn't that he hadn't encountered danger. There were a few times when he almost lost all his belongings. He thought about the current situation of the 5 countries in the Central Plains and had no choice but to nod in agreement. He was old, and it was time for him to stop and retire. Jiang Pengji said, "I'll take care of you when you're old. This old servant also has filial sons and daughters. Little boss, you can't deprive them of their desire to be filial to their father." Gu Exen laughed heartily, his eyes full of sincerity. "This old servant has no regrets in this life to be able to hear you say this. No, there's one thing. What is it? Little boss, you're already 19 years old. When spring comes, you'll be 20. Forgive this old servant for overstepping his bounds, but you should also consider your own affairs." His little boss was definitely the best. No man in the world was worthy of her. However, if the little boss didn't get married, how would she have children? If she didn't have any descendants, Gu Exin wouldn't be able to rest in peace even if he closed his eyes. This matter isn't urgent. Chapter 9:38. This year's autumn hunt was destined to be an eventful one. First, hunting deer dragged the first prince, second prince, and third prince into the water. Following that, Partridge died of illness dragged the rest of the princes into the water. Partridge was the most revered divine eagle by the 3 tribes of the northern borderline, and was also the totem symbol of the northern borderline royal family. Seventh prince obtained a very majestic partridge from the trading company. He liked it very much, but in the end, he reluctantly gave it to his favorite 8th prince. 8th prince was naturally attracted by the partridge, but when he thought of the king of the northern borderline's violent and suspicious nature, how would he dare to keep such a good partridge in his hands? He and 7th prince discussed and prepared to present the partridge during the autumn hunt. If they could gain the approval of the king of the northern borderline during the autumn hunt, their status in the imperial court would rise. To maintain the partridge in its most perfect state, they spent a lot of effort. The day before the offering, 7th prince and 8th prince even personally went to see the partridge, and its condition was very good. Unexpectedly, the partridge died of illness. 8th prince and 7th prince presented the partridge together, and when everyone carried it up, they found out that the partridge was already on its last breath and did not have long to live. The smile on the king of the northern borderline's face froze and immediately turned into anger. He stood up and pulled out a knife from the rack and acted like he was going to hack his 2 sons to death. The king of the northern borderline felt that his body was weak and was unable to satisfy his harem. That's why he consumed Hanshi powder to regain his former glory. He also firmly believed that Hanshi powder could prolong his life and preserve his glory forever. If it wasn't because he was old and weak, which man would like to consume tiger and wolf medicine? But now, his 2 good sons praised him as the king of partridge of the northern borderline, and then turned around to present him a partridge that was dying of illness. The king of the northern borderline was the overlord of the northern borderline, and a ruthless character. For power and status, he stepped on the corpses of his brothers and father, and led the northern borderline from a weak state to a strong state. To him, status and power were the most important. If his sons wanted to touch him, he would kill them. In such a short period of time, the king of the northern borderline was enraged, and the fingers on his right hand trembled uncontrollably. He thought that he would kill his 2 sons on the spot, but unexpectedly, his eyes rolled back, and he fainted from anger. When the king of the northern borderline woke up, his anger was not as strong as before. Investigate. Investigate clearly for this solitude, just who is playing tricks behind the scenes. No matter how stupid the 7th and 8th princes were, they wouldn't dare to give him a dying gonging and curse him in public. The only possibility was that the 2 of them had been schemed against. He wouldn't have known if he hadn't checked, but the moment he did, he was shocked. Many princes were involved in this, but the circumstances varied. Some were intentional, while others were unintentional. Now, all 9 of his sons were reprimanded by the king of the northern borderline. The 4th prince knelt for 2 whole days before he was released. He went back to pack up, burned some incense, and took a bath. Then he solemnly and secretly met with Sun Wen. Mr. is an extraordinary talent. Please accept this humble king's bow. The fourth prince did not like the Han culture, but he was good at pretending and observing people's expressions. He could often poke at the itch of others and win their favor. Fourth prince, you don't have to do this. Wen is just acting on my master's orders. Sun Wen dodged and raised his hand to help the fourth prince, who was still bowing to the ground up. After the fourth prince heard this, a fierce look flashed across his eyes. He admired Sun Wen because Sun Wen only had brains, but no power, and he could control him. However, the fourth prince hated Herentia very much, and even wanted him to die, because Herentia was an important minister of the northern borderline, but now he was toying with the prince of the northern borderline. When he inherited the throne of the northern borderline, the fourth prince would put him in an important position, but Sun Wen would not tolerate Herentia. This was also Sun Wen's goal. He wanted to use the fourth prince to eliminate the other princes, and then provoke the conflict between the fourth prince and Herentia. Before the fourth prince's power grew, he would first urge Herentia and the ninth prince to join forces and get rid of the fourth prince. In the end, only Herentia and the ninth prince were left. When the time came, Sun Wen had other arrangements. He would ensure that the northern borderline's royal family would be completely extinct. Thinking of this, Sun Wen's old face raised a somewhat detached smile, just in time to meet the situation. This time, thank you for your guidance, Mr., but this humble king does not understand one thing. The fourth prince secretly rubbed his knees. Bursts of pain spread throughout his body, making it impossible for him to kneel, so he could only sit on a small stool. Sun Wen asked, "Fourth prince, please speak." The fourth prince said, "Mr., you have the talent to rule the world. You can remove this humble king from this matter. Why make this humble king suffer like this?" After kneeling for 2 days and 2 nights, not to mention his knees, just holding in his urine for 2 days made him extremely uncomfortable. Self-degradation is also a form of self-protection. Sun Wen smiled. You should learn this from your eldest brother. If everyone is involved, and only you are aloof, won't the target be too obvious? At that time, you will become the target of public criticism. Therefore, you can only suffer. The fourth prince sighed inwardly. It was not that he did not know this, but he could not blame Sun Wen for not doing a good job. You mean, eldest brother used self-degradation to protect himself? The fourth prince's eyes widened in surprise. The Han family pays particular attention to the eldest son. The first prince's biological mother is the first wife of the king. He is both the eldest son and the eldest son. Not only is he the oldest, but he has also been running his forces for the longest time. His mother's family is low-key and has not declined. Although the Han family's rules are not popular in the northern borderline, there are still important ministers in the court who like to follow this rule. At this time, the first prince is the target of public criticism. If he performs slightly better, not to mention the other princes, even the king will not tolerate him. In order to protect himself and plan for the future, he can only pollute himself and retreat in order to advance. The fourth prince did not agree, but Sun Wen's words were clear and logical, so he had to believe him. He remembered that the first prince was indeed outstanding when he was young. Thank you for your guidance, sir. In this case, he had to be wary of this eldest brother. The fourth prince consulted Sun Wen for an hour, as if he had obtained a treasure. Little did he know that Sun Wen, who was scheming for him, was a four-way spy. He was truly loyal to Lu Shi. On the surface, he submitted to Herentia, but he secretly hooked up with the fourth prince. Deeper down, he was in cahoots with the ninth prince. How could he not be talented if he could have a foot in 4 boats with ease? When the atmosphere was almost ready, the two of them talked from the internal affairs of the northern borderline to the border. Speaking of the border, they had to mention the Lu family of Chongzhou, who was like a fishbone stuck in the throat of the northern borderline. After Lu Shi left, Lu Shi, who was even more difficult to deal with, came. The northern borderline must have offended the Tai Sui these few years. The fourth prince snorted and said contemptuously, "I wonder what color Lu Shi's woman is." Sun Wen said, "It doesn't matter whether she is good-looking or not. What matters is that she has troops and power in her hands. The fourth prince glanced at Sun Wen and said, Sir, you don't understand. Don't understand what? Sun Wen asked, amused. The fourth prince confided in Sun Wen and even joked from time to time. He said meaningfully, For a man, there is nothing more interesting than conquering a woman who is difficult to conquer. Chapter 9:39. Sun Wen despised the fourth prince in his heart, but his expression remained calm and composed. It was as if he would remain unfazed even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of him. The fourth prince seemed to have realized that he should not speak in front of Sun Wen and leave a frivolous impression, so he quickly changed the topic. However, Sun Wen controlled the tempo and successfully led the topic to the border. Master Sun, in your opinion, how should we deal with the Liu family of Chongzhou? The fourth prince coveted Jiang Pingji, but he wanted to use his male identity to gain a sense of superiority and boost his confidence. Returning to reality, he was only the son of a female slave. He had no right to speak to Jiang Pingji as an equal. Sun Wen raised his eyelids and said calmly, Does the fourth prince think that the most important thing now is to deal with the Liu family? The fourth prince's expression froze, and he looked puzzled. The Liu family has stationed troops at the border and looks like they're going to attack. Isn't that enough? Or do you think that we should first deal with internal strife? The fourth prince asked in a subtle manner. Was it more important to deal with Liu Shi or to get rid of his brother who was competing with him? Sun Wen smiled and asked the fourth prince, If the Liu family sends troops now, how will the northern borderline respond? The fourth prince was speechless. She won't do that. Even if the northern borderline was a starving camel, it was still much bigger than a horse like Liu Shi. She was just a small duke, and she dared to attack the northern borderline? Who gave her the courage? Sun Wen asked again, What if the Liu family does? The fourth prince said proudly, If she dares to come, we'll accept her. Sun Wen smiled coldly, and the corner of his mouth curled into a mocking arc. Wrong. If the Liu family arrives, the northern borderline will be the one retreating. The fourth prince flew into a rage when he heard this. He was about to lose his temper when Sun Wen said calmly, A horse plague destroyed most of the northern borderline's military strength. Wu Liba offered a plan to buy the Mares from Cangzhou at a high price, hoping that the northern borderline would recover quickly. It's a good idea, but he forgot that buying the Mares at a high price gives the northern borderline a chance to be reborn, but it also puts them in an irrecoverable situation. As long as the feudal lords of the Central Plains realize that the northern borderline is strong on the outside, but weak on the inside, they will gather their troops and have another Huangshui meeting. What will happen to the northern borderline then? The fourth prince's face darkened instantly. Even though he was in the north borderline, he knew that the Huangshui meeting had gathered 23 feudal vassals of Dongqing, totaling more than 400,000 troops. Given the current situation in the north borderline, they really could not afford to offend them. As the prince of the northern borderline's royal family, the fourth prince knew the internal situation of the northern borderline best. Even though he kept telling himself that the cavalry of the northern borderline was invincible after the horse plague, the cavalry had indeed been destroyed by 70 to 80%. Without their cavalry, the advantage that the northern borderline had over the Central Plains would be greatly reduced. In order to realize their ambition of conquering the Central Plains, the royal family of the northern borderline had put in a lot of effort for several years. Now that he was at a critical juncture of recovering his vitality, he could not afford to make any mistakes. If word gets out at this time, the fourth prince secretly clenched his fists. Liu Shi wouldn't dare to do that, and the other feudal vassals might not respond to her call. Sun Wen poured a bucket of cold water on him. That's not necessarily true. There's an old saying in the Central Plains, those who are not of the same race are bound to have different intentions. The threat that the north borderline posed to Dongqing could be seen just by looking at the four factions of Nanman and Nanshan. In order not to follow in Nanqing's footsteps, there will definitely be feudal lords who will respond. The fourth prince's face was as pale as a sheet of paper. He followed Sun Wen's train of thought, and the more he thought about it, the more he broke out in a cold sweat. Lu Shi was not a feudal lord who acted according to common sense. A few years ago, she had begun to station troops in Chongzhou, stocking up the fields and provisions, and was ready to fight. It was hard to say if this madwoman would risk her life to fight to the death with the northern borderline. Even though he was unwilling to admit it, the Han people did not lack madmen, nor did they lack the righteousness to sacrifice their lives for justice. With their pride and integrity, even if the northern borderline respected the Han culture, they still could not understand the foolish idea of sacrificing themselves for others. The fourth prince hurriedly asked, "Mr. Sun, you must teach me." Sun Wen smiled. Of course. He wore a smile on his face, but in his heart, he had cursed Wei Si hundreds of times. Wei Si was a lunatic who even exploited the labor of an old man to the limit. First, he had asked him to sow discord among the 9 princes of the northern borderline. He had worked hard and lost who knew how many brain cells, but he finally saw results. Before he had time to enjoy the fruits of victory, Wei Si sent him another message. This time, the content was even more outrageous. He was asked to help Lu Shi recapture more than half of Shangyu County, which had been occupied by the northern frontier for more than 20 years. When the northern frontier invaded, the entire Shangyu County fell, and all 6 cities were lost. Although Master Yuan Jing went to the north borderline and took back 3 cities, there were still 3 cities in the north borderline's hands. If they couldn't even take back these 3 cities, how could they talk about reclaiming the northern border? When Jiang Pengji was worried, Wei Si naturally tossed and turned restlessly in bed. As a result, this big hat was placed on Sun Wen's head. Go Sun Zidao, asterisk, 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 one has a plan. We can sacrifice the rook to save the king, killing several birds with one stone. Sun Wen smiled meaningfully. Killing several birds with one stone? Fourth prince bowed deeply and said, "Please enlighten me, Mr. Sunday." After listening to Sun Wen's analysis, the fourth prince felt as if he had seen the sun. Chongzhou had many soldiers and generals, and every one of them was an elite. There was even a rumor that this batch of elite soldiers had been trained for more than 3 years. What did 3 years mean? Regardless of whether it was the Central Plains or the northern borderline, soldiers who had been carefully trained for 3 months could be considered elite soldiers. Soldiers who had been trained for more than 3 years, what should they be called? The Liu family of Chongzhou was indeed a troublesome enemy. If they were not eliminated, it would be difficult to rest easy. Fourth prince, you also know that it is not advisable to start a war in the northern borderline now, but we cannot let Chongzhou see any clues. Sun Wen's deep voice traveled into his ears, like a teacher of an academy teaching earnestly. The fourth prince subconsciously straightened his back and listened attentively. If that is the case, we might as well take another path and sacrifice the rook to save the king. Aren't the 3 cities of Chongzhou and Shangyu County the best candidates to be discarded? After hearing this, the fourth prince felt a wave of displeasure. He looked at Sun Wen with a suspicious gaze. This Sun Wen before him was also a citizen of the Han family. Are you saying that we should abandon the 3 cities? Sun Wen acted as if he did not see the fourth prince's suspicion and wariness. He smiled mysteriously and said no. The fourth prince's heart sank. He pestered him and said, "Please don't tease me. Just say what you have to say. To the northern borderline, the 3 cities are not even of any value." The fourth prince interrupted him. "How dare you say that?" A murderous intent emerged in his heart. Sun Wen said, "I'm afraid the fourth prince doesn't know the situation in the 3 cities. The Han people have either escaped or died. At the very least, they have been captured and sold as slaves. The fertile fields are idle and no one cultivates them. The houses leak and no one repairs them. The city walls are deserted and no one guards them." Chapter 940. Even so, the fourth prince still threatened him with a sentence. "Mr. Sun, aren't you afraid that I will punish you or even kill you for saying this in front of me?" As soon as he finished speaking, the fourth prince's eyes emitted a terrifying killing intent, and the scimitar at his waist was already unsheathed. Of course I'm afraid. Who wouldn't be afraid of death? Although this old man is 46 this year, I haven't lived long enough. Sun Wen was calm and composed. He looked at Prince Roland with a faint smile, his eyes shining with wisdom and confidence. His eyes clearly conveyed a message. He was not afraid. He was not afraid of the threat of death from Prince Roland. He did not even think that Prince Roland would really punish him. The two of them stared at each other for a long time. The fourth prince gasped for breath, with beads of sweat dripping from his forehead. He raised his hand and sheathed his scimitar. Forget it. If Mr. Sun has anything to say, just say it. I will listen. After saying that, he sat back down unwillingly. How could the fourth prince be a match for Sun when it came to scheming? In terms of mental fortitude, Sun Wen had attained the transcendent realm of being able to remain unfazed even if Mount Tai were to collapse in front of him. In the end, Sun Wen won, completely dispelling the fourth prince's suspicions. Sun Wen said with a smile, "The 3 cities of Shangyu County are tasteless, but it's not a pity to abandon them. It's better to make good use of them. If we use it as bait, we can injure Lu Shi and prevent her from sending troops to threaten the northern borderline for a year or 2. At the same time, we can also help His Highness get rid of his greatest threat." The fourth prince's eyes flashed fiercely as he said, "My mortal enemy." Sun Wen said, "The northern borderline has always been particular about choosing talents and talents. Regardless of one's background, the fourth prince is naturally qualified to ascend to the throne. According to the inheritance system of the Han family, even if all his brothers died, the fourth prince would not have the right to inherit the throne. Who asked his mother to be a female slave for others to play with? However, the customs of Beijiang were different from those of the Central Plains. There were no rules in the northern borderline. Whichever child was stronger could inherit more property. Even if Prince Roland was just the son of a slave girl, he was still qualified to inherit the throne as long as he was strong enough. Sun Wen's short sentence quickly and accurately poked the fourth prince's weak spot. Prince Roland's hand that was holding the machete trembled, and even his breathing stopped suspiciously. Of course, he knew that he was qualified, but being qualified did not mean that he had hope. His mother's clan was too weak and barren. His starting point was the lowest among his brothers. Within a year or 2, how will he have the energy to start another war? The fourth prince's eyes lit up. Yes, as long as the situation in the north borderline was peaceful for a year or 2. Master is indeed brilliant. The more I get to know him, the more I feel that he's the one I want, Jiang Pengji said with certainty. Ambitious man who wants to be a canary. If he doesn't want to live an ignoble life, I'm afraid my lord won't bear to let him suffer. If his identity was revealed, Wei Ci would have to stay away from the center of power. It wasn't that they didn't trust him, but it was for the sake of unity within the faction so that others wouldn't feel unbalanced or have negative emotions. If Jiang Pengji insisted on having her own way, she might harm her and Wei Ci. Then what does Wen Zhang think? Qiguan Rang said, "It's better to keep it a secret. Rang can pretend that he doesn't know anything." Keep a secret? Jiang Pengji murmured repeatedly. As long as it's the Lord's child, it will definitely be your blood. It doesn't matter who the father is. Qiguan Rang said, "You can say that you got pregnant because of feelings, or that you got married and had a child in your dream. As long as you have a child, you can keep the father's identity a secret. As long as others don't know who the father is, Zixiao can also continue to realize his ambitions and aspirations. But in this way, my lord and Zixiao will have to suffer." Jiang Pengji thought about it for a long time and laughed bitterly after a while. "Wen Zhang, you're thinking too far ahead. We'll have to face it sooner or later." Qiguan Rang took over the account book that Jiang Pengji had finished reviewing and said expressionlessly, "You should also pay attention to your emotions. What happens in private is none of my business. In daily life, you should at least control your emotions." Just like the previous time, she looked at Wei Ci as if she wanted to skin him alive. It was always like that. Even the slow-witted generals could notice the clues. Qiguan Rang also reminded her in private to prevent his lord from doing something that she would regret for the rest of her life in the heat of youth. Wenjeng, I'll think about it. Although she didn't want to admit it, Qiguan Rang's solution was considered the best of both worlds. It's still troubled times now. It's not suitable to think about these matters. We'd better get down to business. Jiang Pengji changed the topic stiffly. Qiguan Rang could only roll his eyes helplessly. As they were talking, Wei Siai was summoned from outside the tent. "Greetings, my lord." Wei Siai first bowed, then nodded to Qiguan Rang, who was sitting next to Jiang Pengji. He took the initiative to sit on the other side. "This is the tip-off I just received. The big fish has taken a bait." Wei Siai handed over the booklet with both hands. Jiang Pengji took it and glanced at it. This Sun One is truly capable. This trick within a trick is truly beautiful. The letter said that Sun One had secretly plotted and successfully made the second prince of the northern borderline volunteer to take the order to be stationed in the 3 cities of Shangyu. Chapter 942. The second prince rode a tall horse leisurely. "This is Nanshan County of Shangyu County? It doesn't look like much. It's not as prosperous as a small tribe in the north borderline. The houses on both sides of the street were dilapidated, and there were almost no traces of merchants. I heard that Shangyu County was a good place in the past, where merchants and trade flourished. Things remain the same, but the people have changed." The second prince's advisor rode a step behind, looking around and sighing. "Ha ha! It's just a small town at the border of the Central Plains. How prosperous can it be?" The second prince laughed disdainfully. He brought 20,000 private troops to camp outside the city, while he brought 1,000 elites into the city. He spent all his fortune to train these 20,000 elites, and he loved them as if they were his eyes. In order to keep the benefits to himself, he gritted his teeth, made up his mind, and took out all his belongings. He volunteered to the king of the north borderline to take over the 3 cities of Shangyu. The original guards were sent elsewhere. The second prince sat down boldly. The official registrar of Nanshan County trembled in front of him, waiting for orders. "Report how many soldiers are left in the city." The official registrar trembled and said, "There are 6,700 guards in the city." The second prince turned his head and sneered at the advisor. "There are only 6,700 people in Nanshan County. What can such a small number of guards do?" Lu Shi of Chongzhou is also a good-for-nothing. I heard that the pedantic Confucian scholars of Dongqing always talk about taking back their territory. Nanshan County's defense is so weak, yet Lu Shi doesn't send troops to fight back. It seems that the cowards of Dongqing are just shouting slogans when they take back their territory. The advisor smiled and flattered the second prince, saying a lot of good things, making the second prince feel comfortable. The second prince was full of confidence and spoke with fervor. Although Lu Shi is a bit of a coward, she's a girl after all. It's normal that she's not as courageous as a man. Although there are only 6,700 guards in Nanshan County, every one of them is an elite of the north borderline. They can fight against 10 men on the battlefield. Lu Shi is flattered by the outside world, but she's still a timid girl. She won't amount to much. The advisor's smile was a little awkward, but he still catered to the second prince and praised him. Compared to the second prince's blind arrogance, the advisor was somewhat clear-headed. Apart from anything else, he could understand why Jiang Pengji had not mobilized her troops to recapture the 3 cities of Shangyu. First of all, fighting a war was not something that could be fought just because one wanted to. No matter how resentful the people of Dongqing were, the 3 cities of Shangyu had been ceded by Dongqing to the northern borderline. After a series of footsteps, the soldiers of the northern borderline carried the corpses into the hall. Other than the corpses, there were many clues found at the scene. The most important of them was a token. This token was none other than the token of a Chongzhou soldier. The weapons left behind and the words carved on the weapons all pointed to Chongzhou. After seeing this solid evidence, the second prince clenched his fists in anger and gritted his teeth. "Lu Shi, I haven't found trouble with her, and she's already stirring up trouble. The second prince's anger soared. The advisor beside him groaned. Your Highness, we still need to investigate further. To conclude that Chongzhou's Lu Shi provoked us so hastily, what if it's not? Before the advisor could finish, the second prince interrupted him. What's so hasty about this? Besides Lu Shi, who else would do such a thing? Besides, even if Lu Shi didn't do it, so what? Sooner or later, I and Lu Shi will have to fight. The second prince volunteered to come to the 3 cities of Shangyu. He wanted to use the 3 cities as a springboard to sneak attack Jiangpengji's granary. He wanted to rest for 2 days before making a move. Now that Chongzhou could not sit still and test them, how could the second prince tolerate it? The advisor was speechless. For some reason, he felt that this matter was unreliable. The second prince said, Lu Shi killed 25 of my men. I will repay him tenfold. The advisor's eyelids twitched violently. He watched as the second prince sent someone to invite the soldiers to discuss military matters. When I take over her granary, Lu Shi will have no more grain. Let's see how arrogant she can be then. According to the map, there were a total of 3 granaries. The second prince had already sent people to check these 3 places. Almost all of them had stored 2 million dong of military rations. What did this mean? 300,000 dong was enough for 100,000 soldiers to eat for more than a month. The grain that Lu Shi had accumulated over the years was enough for 100,000 soldiers to fight for 2 years. It was a pity that Lu Shi did not have a good eye for using people. He actually leaked the distribution map of such an important granary. Once she ran out of grain, she would be dead. The second prince looked in the direction of Chongzhou and gritted his teeth. If I can't transport the grain, I won't leave a single grain for you. Chapter 944. The night was gloomy, the moon was dark, and the wind was strong. Hearing that the second prince was going to fight in person, the guards and advisors around him felt like their heads were going to explode. Your Highness, your body is precious. Swords have no eyes on the battlefield. If you are accidentally hurt, we won't be able to answer to the king. His personal guards tried to dissuade him, and his advisors also echoed him. However, the second prince had a headstrong temperament and felt very good about himself. He said, I studied hard with a martial arts master. Even my father praised me as a warrior of the northern borderline. How can I be afraid of death? Before he was an adult, he had defeated his martial arts master, defeated several guards who were his sparring partners, and killed the enemy bravely on the battlefield. He always brought back a lot of trophies. He was the brave and powerful man of the northern borderline. How could the weak soldiers of the Central Plains hurt him? The northern borderline was not peaceful. There were many voices within. If a small tribe developed too fast or did not obey the orders of the imperial court, it would inevitably lead to an expedition by the imperial court. However, such small fights were usually used for the second generation of the nobles of the northern borderline. The second prince had led troops on several expeditions and won every time. This made him arrogant and complacent, and he could not even see his own abilities clearly. As a prince, it was enough to stay in the rear and wait for military achievements. Why did he have to go to the front to cause trouble and make things difficult for his teammates? Did he not know what his own abilities were? The advisors and guards repeatedly tried to persuade the second prince, but not only did they not persuade him, they even caused him to reprimand and insult. In the end, he stubbornly said, "No need to persuade me anymore. I have made up my mind." The more the people around him tried to persuade him, the angrier he got, and the more he wanted to prove himself. Lu Shi, a woman, could kill the enemy on the battlefield. He, a brave man of the northern borderline, was inferior to a woman? Wait until I catch Lu Shi myself. The second prince looked around and snorted as if he was mocking. Although he was headstrong, the second prince also knew that his life was precious, and he would still listen to the advisor's arrangements in some areas. He asked the vanguard troops to change into the uniforms of the Han soldiers and raise Jiangpengji's flag. It was best if they did not encounter the enemy, but if they encountered the enemy's patrol troops, they could use it to get away with it. The night was dark and windy, and it was suitable for robbery. The second prince ordered everyone to hold wooden chopsticks in their mouths and cover their mouths with cloth. They were not allowed to make any noise. The 12,000 soldiers split into several groups and advanced toward Chao Wu along the small paths on the map. Because of the detailed map in his hand, the second prince led his troops to avoid several waves of sentries, and the journey was more daunting than dangerous. As they approached Chao Wu's granary, the number of patrols increased. Even with the cover of night, they were still caught red-handed. "Who is it?" The second prince panicked. The vanguard officer beside him replied in fluent Mandarin of the Central Plains. "We were sent by Lu Prefecture Overseer to reinforce the granary. The prefecture magistrate is worried that the barbarians of the northern borderline will attack the granary." This vanguard official was also a talent. When he lied, his face didn't turn red, and he didn't even pant. He even revealed a look of awe-inspiring righteousness. The night was too dark, and there was some distance between them, so the guards couldn't see how many people were with the second prince. They asked a few questions and let them pass. The second prince was relieved, but then he felt a little disdainful. That's all. Perhaps the luck of the first half of the night had run out. The second prince encountered several patrols in a row, and they were getting more and more adept at dealing with them. Unknowingly, he had been delayed for an hour. At that moment, they were less than a quarter of an hour away from Chao Wu's granary. Compared to the smooth journey on the second prince's side, the other two routes did not have such preferential treatment. Along the way, they only encountered 3 waves of patrols, and they used the same method of lying to fool them. Little did they know that the patrols under Jiang Pengji were different from other patrols. Before dealing with each other, they had to match the secret signal. If the secret signal didn't match, they would be killed. Of course, it was different today. The patrols had received instructions from their superiors that if they met someone they couldn't match the secret signal with, they should not make a sound and cooperate with the other party's performance. The North Borderline thought that their operation was smooth, but they didn't know that their every move was within the enemy's expectations. Li Jiang's granary. Li Yun chewed on some hay in his mouth. He held his spear with one hand and wiped the tip of the spear with the other. His sharp eyes were surging with the desire to fight. "Waner, Nguyen, wait for me to return." Li Yun threw the wiping cloth aside. The hurried footsteps of his subordinates were getting closer. "Commander Li Yun, the enemy has formed a formation and surrounded the granary." Just in time, Li Yun straightened his body. He grabbed the white reins of his warhorse with one hand and nimbly flipped himself onto the horse. He held his spear high in the air. Deploy the troops to meet the enemy. At that moment, the sound of fighting could be heard from outside the granary. 2,000 cavalrymen rushed towards Li Jiang's granary. Charge! Based on past experiences, the granary's defensive line would not be able to withstand a single wave of their charge. It would collapse 1,000 miles away. Not to mention that they had appeared suddenly. Chongzhou should not have been prepared. If they met the enemy without any preparation, it would be even more impossible to block the iron hooves of their cavalrymen. It was different this time. When the cavalrymen in rattan armor formed a formation and accelerated their charge, the front hooves of the horses suddenly missed their footing and they fell forward with great inertia. A group of human heads emerged from the ground. They held unknown sickle-like weapons in their hands and ruthlessly slashed at the legs of the horses, causing them to fall forward in pain. After doing that, they immediately retracted their heads into the ground and used the same trick on the second echelon who could not react in time. Dozens of circular trenches were dug around a Li Jiang granary in a radius of 200 feet. This was to deal with the first wave of the North Borderline's cavalrymen. The distance between the trenches did not follow any pattern. There were even circular waves. To conceal the existence of the trenches, the empty space was covered with grass. Coupled with the cover of the night, no one could see any clues. Near the center of the granary, there were densely packed caltrops scattered between the trenches. Seeing this, the troops from the North Borderline also realized that they had fallen into an ambush. Li Jiang's granary was not a piece of fatty meat. It was clearly a trap with fatty meat. However, the cavalry speed was too fast. A distance of 200 feet was nothing at all. When they realized that it was an ambush and attempted to retreat, the first batch of cavalrymen had already rushed to the granary. "You want to retreat? Have you asked for the permission of the spear in my hand?" To make it easier to face the enemy, a small path about 5 feet wide was left in all directions of the granary. At the same time, a similar scene was happening in Sang Mo's granary. Jiang Pengji was someone who could not sit still. She did not like to mark documents and was passionate about personally fighting in battle. The north borderline was there to attack the granary and steal the grain. Apart from bringing weapons and troops, their troops also brought along a large number of carriages used to transport the grain. The troops at the front lost, and their morale plummeted. The troops at the back tried to retreat. The carriages became an obstacle for their cavalrymen. They were stuck in one place and could not break through in all directions. The quality of the north borderline's cavalrymen was not bad. Chapter 945. Xingyue Tianyan. Who was the one with the high energy warning just now? Why don't you make it clear? EW. No, the baby is going to vomit for a while. Has your streaming room always been so bloody and violent? F***CK me. You're going to split me and my horse in half? Streamer Widajun. Why hasn't such a bloody and violent live broadcast room been shut down? Feng's Remembrance. You make it sound like the streamer who promoted a certain color has been censored. Chow Lao, duh. Watching this kind of live stream in the middle of the night, it's really creepy. Why couldn't the cross-dimensional live stream be more harmonious? It was either pornographic or violent. Watching too much of it would affect the physical and mental health of young children. That was the content of the blue bullet screen. Compared to their panic, the red bullet screen viewers were much calmer. He was not surprised at all. Wu Ye Zhongxing. The host isn't always so violent. She's usually reasonable. She only uses her fists when she can't be reasoned with. Those people from a northern borderline are asking for a beating. My streamer is so handsome that he has no friends. Host, when are you going to marry me? Bellflower in the starry sky. The streamer is a master of the aesthetics of violence. She gets more and more violent every time. In the past, he only knew how to chop people with axes. Now, he could even chop people and horses in half. Full marks for that close-up, just now. Jiang Pengji personally led the troops at Sang Mo's granary. When the two parties engaged in battle, she would act as a member of the Zhanma battalion. The horse-chopping battalion was a special battalion that she had specially trained to deal with the cavalry of the northern borderline. The weapons in their hands were all specially forged, and the modeo in their hands was incomparably sharp. The blades were heavy and broad. Compared to the speed of the cavalry, the horse-slaying battalion pursued stability and ruthlessness. They didn't need a lot of speed. They just needed to coordinate with other units to resist the cavalry and reduce the pressure on all sides. The soldiers of the horse-chopping camp were all carefully selected from the various battalions. Their pay was twice as high as that of ordinary soldiers, and their daily training was also much heavier. Because the armors and weapons used by the horse-chopping camp were heavier, the requirement for the soldiers' stamina and strength was higher. If they didn't have a strong physique and strength, they wouldn't be able to fight for a long time. In order to increase their endurance in battle, Jiang Pengji also allowed the soldiers of the Zhanma battalion to adopt the improved 3-stage battle tactic of the crossbowmen. Take turns to lighten the load. In addition to all kinds of high-intensity training, the various military camps would also hold regular military exercises. There are at least 5,000 or 6,000 of them, right? According to combat experience, the number of soldiers guarding the granary was about that. However, the advisor didn't know that there were only about 2,000 soldiers guarding the granary. The number of 5,000 or 6,000 was too much. The soldiers seemed disorderly, but they were actually prepared to flee. They ran in other directions. After several trips, it gave the illusion that there were 5,000 or 6,000 deserters. I heard that Lu Shi trained his soldiers for 3 or 5 years. His elite soldiers are like this, The advisor awkwardly found a way out for himself to avoid angering the second prince again. The second prince laughed and said, "Sheep are sheep. No matter how they train, how can they beat the wolves on the grassland?" The Han men of the Central Plains gave him the impression that they were weak bamboo poles that could be blown away by the wind. Such men couldn't even satisfy the Han women, let alone fight the valiant generals of the northern borderline. The entire granary of Chao Wu had a total of 1,000,000 dawn of grain. Even if the second prince brought 12,000 soldiers and horses, they couldn't load all of them into the supply wagons in a short time. Moreover, they did not bring that many wagons with them. If I had known that there was so much grain here and that the soldiers guarding the grain were so weak, I would have brought 10 more wagons. In order not to waste food, every wagon was filled with grain. The wheels were deeply embedded in the mud. Not only were the wagons full of grain, but he also asked each cavalry to carry 2 bags of grain on their backs. Seeing this, the advisor's scalp went numb. The cavalry's advantage was their mobility. How could they run if they encountered danger with the heavy bags of grain on their backs? "Your Highness, this is not appropriate." As the saying goes, it is better to come at the right time than to come early. Li Yun's sneak attack was coordinated perfectly. Jiang Pengji had a carefree smile on her face. She galloped on the horse and shot a few waves of fire arrows, all aimed at the cavalry of the northern borderline. "Zhenshi Minguzi, streamer, the rations are all piled up there. If you fire the fire arrows, won't they all burn?" They knew Jiang Pengji's temperament. She was generous to others, but she was stingy with her own food. Every time she ate, she always ate the last grain of rice. To let such a thrifty person set fire to the food that the people had painstakingly cultivated was really heart-wrenching. Pian Kasai, if you don't sacrifice your child, you won't be able to catch the wolf. Using such a batch of rations to exchange for tens of thousands of soldiers and horses from the northern borderline is a great deal. If the cavalry of the northern borderline were to enter the battlefield, not only would the streamer lose rations, but she would also lose many elite troops that she had painstakingly trained. Moreover, didn't you notice that after the fire arrows were fired, the fire quickly grew bigger? After being reminded by the audience in the streaming room, many people came to their senses. That's right, the fire was too big. Although it was a dry and flammable season, it shouldn't have caught fire so easily, right? At that moment, a veteran in the streaming room pointed out the key point. "Yewu Yanling, there's a problem with the rations." The audience strenuously observed. Indeed, they discovered that the stray fire arrows had pierced the rations and the fire had spread quickly. Nuzwang Xinghan, the streamer is indeed wicked. Other than the outermost rations in the Chaowu granary that are real, the ones inside are all fake, right? No matter how vigilant the enemy is, it is impossible for them to open up all the rations and check them. Just as the audience guessed, Jiang Pengji only put tens of thousands of dawn of real rations in the Chaowu granary. The rest were all fake. "Xinjia, but I have a doubt. If it's fake rations, won't the grain bag feel different when touched?" How could Jiang Pengji not consider this problem? She asked someone to smear the inside of the grain bag with a sticky liquid, then rolled it in the rations and stuck a layer of rations on it. If the cavalry wanted to charge out of the sea of fire, Lu Shi's soldiers would stop them and force them back. The second prince grabbed his advisor's wrist in a panic. "How do we break out?" The advisor said, "Naturally, we'll gather our forces and break through from the weakest point." How could he ask such a stupid question? This teammate was too much of a scammer. The second prince took a few deep breaths and summoned his personal guards to prepare to break out of the encirclement. Although he had 12,000 soldiers with him, most of them were cavalry. If the terrain was open, breaking out of the encirclement would not be a problem. How could a two-legged man outrun a four-legged horse? Unfortunately, they were also carrying a large number of supply wagons, which were filled with heavy sacks of grain, further limiting the range of movement of the cavalry. Apart from that, Jiang Pengji also set fire to the rations on the carriages. They had no time to care about anything else. Lu Shi, B*TCH. The second prince gritted his teeth in anger. He did not know what went wrong, but he knew that there was something wrong with the map he had obtained. If it was not premeditated, how could Lu Shi have calculated it so accurately? It was estimated that not only Chao Wu's granary, but Li Zhong's and Seng Mo's granaries were also ambushed. The second prince's eyes reddened when he thought of the private troops he had spent a lot of money to raise. Your Highness, now is not the time to be angry. Where there's life, there's hope. Your safety is more important. The advisor interrupted the second prince's thoughts. It was more important to escape now. What was the point of thinking so much? The two sides broke through the encirclement. The second prince, escorted by more than 1,000 elites, prepared to break out of the encirclement. When Jiang Pengji received the news, her face revealed a blood-stained and hideous smile. Escape? Have you asked me? After you catch him, break his legs. She put the bow and arrows back on the horse's back and picked up the heavy MO sword again. Catch him alive. After Jiang Pengji's reminder, the audience in the streaming room realized that the enemy leader was about to escape. How could he do that? Lao Cg Lianmeng. Although the streamer used a trick, they are still a group of cavalrymen. I look down on them for running away before the battle even starts. Cat Demon June. Running away when you can't win is the essence of cavalrymen. Usually, it's either a small defeat or a big victory. It's probably unprecedented in history to be so miserable. Who asked them to be greedy? But then again, the person who made the plan was too evil. Let me worship for 2 seconds. But then again, who was the person who made the plan this time? The audience was stunned for a moment and almost forgot about it. Shinja, this plan was made by Beauty CI, the streamer, and Sunwon, right?